This is Zestology, the new rules for energy, vitality and motivation. Tony Wrighton here, walking down Bermondsey Street, which is where I live in London. And thanks, by the way, for all the nice feedback I've had on the new Zestology logo. A very long time in the making. Yeah, about a year. But some people think it's a kind of setting sun behind me or a rising sun, and some people think it's the kind of segments of an orange or a lemon. Some people think it's just a massive orange blob coming out of my head. Whatever you think it is, glad you like it, and I'm pretty happy with it. So it's a long time in the making, but I think the kind of zesty colours of kind of orange and yellow suit this podcast quite well. Right, today's podcast is with a man who looks at a theme which is quite popular on this podcast. It's tracking and tech, and when it helps our lives and when it starts to hinder it. Dr. Andy Galpin is highly qualified, really knows his subject, and talks on, well, being kind of wary of trackers. I've always loved a good tracker, an Oura ring, as you'll hear in this podcast, or a Jawbone that I used to use, or a Fitbit or whatever else you might want to use. He says the trials and tribulations of using tracking and tech for better health, they aren't always positive. So, how much tech do you use? How many tech fasts do you go on? And in terms of enhancing your fitness, do you find tech to be something that could help or hinder you? It's a great guy, really got a fantastic kind of scientific basis and so much passion for his subject as well. Here he is, Dr. Andy Galpin on Zestology. Dr. Andy, thank you very much for joining me on Zestology.
Oh, pleasure to be here, man. Looking forward to it after quite a while setting this thing up. I'm glad to be here.
Me too. So good to finally talk to you. And unplugging from technology is such a theme on this show. It seems like so many people, an increasingly amount of people, are not only suffering from the problem of kind of tech distraction or weapons of mass distraction, but also becoming more and more aware of it as well. So I thought the first thing to do is, since you work with a lot of sportsmen and sports teams as well, what measurable changes have you seen, both positive and negative, from the influence of this explosion of technology that we are seeing at the moment?
So that's a great question. We'll go with the negative first, I guess, and then end on a cheery note. Probably the biggest one is the athletes simply being distracted, which means when they're training, the quality goes is compromised quite a bit. They are either outsourcing their own physiology to the tech, which is kind of a fancy way of saying they don't take any personal responsibility for their own body anymore, because they just assume the technology is going to tell them if they should be feeling well or if they should not be feeling well. That's probably the single largest issue. And where that is a real problem is, you imagine you're practicing a particular exercise or a particular skill, and you can only get so many of those repetitions physically. But so much more of the learning comes from when you practice those mental repetitions over and over again. And if you don't have that focus, because you constantly have input coming into your brain, you constantly have sensation, those mental repetitions go away. So it just takes the athletes a lot longer to gain skill, and they have a huge disconnect with what their body's actually telling them. So they have no idea how to listen to what their body is saying.
And what are those inputs that you're referring to?
Just everything from being on their phone too much social media. They are waiting for technology to tell them that their heart rate is at a certain place, or that they've done this much physical activity. Instead of feeling that and being able to identify, I'm going too slow here, or I was out of position here, or I was training too much, I need a day off here, they're just not paying attention because they're so distracted with input, which is looking through the data, what are the numbers showing me, that they're not feeling. And that's probably the central theme of the entire book is, let's use the technology in combination with our body and not just completely outsource our body to the technology.
So that might be something like getting distracted just by technology in general, looking at Facebook or something. But what you're saying is also, because I'm a big fan of tracking, but also you're saying if you rely on tracking, and presumably professional sports teams have some very advanced kind of metrics that they can measure themselves by, you're not actually focusing on the sensation of how things feel. Are you also saying that as well?
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, I was out at the the coaches conference a couple of months ago giving a talk, and after I was done, I had this, NFL strength and conditioning coaches, Major League Baseball coaches come up to me and just be like, "Thank you." Like, these are the people that are tracking these mega databases, and they're saying the same thing, that it's not telling you everything, and it can actually be really misconstrued. Maybe a very easy example of that is, I'm not sure if you've talked to him yet, but Fergus Conley came out with a book recently.
No.
And he was in charge of sports science for the San Francisco 49ers, for the American football team, as well as the University of Michigan, which is one of these sports that has a huge, huge budget for sports tracking. And he tells a story in his book about how he tracked a bunch of data and he found some of his players, the best players on his football team were moving the least amount. They were covering the least amount of ground in the game. Mm-hmm. They were moving the slowest. And so if you just look at the data, it looks like, well, maybe the best players are being lazy, maybe they're taking plays off, maybe they're not really giving as much effort. But he actually said, no, I think they're not moving as much because they're more efficient. And they're not moving as fast because they understand the game better, so they're in the better position, so they don't have to go as much. They're not wasting as much energy. And my point is, the data doesn't tell you which one of those two interpretations is correct. The data just say that they move less distance. So you still have to use your own intelligence. You still have to use your own physiology, communicating with the athletes, watching the game, paying attention to what you're feeling to really understand what those data mean. So the meaning is being completely lost if you just collect the data and let some stupid app on your phone tell you, this is the data we recorded, therefore take a day off. Data and technology like this have a tremendous amount of benefit, and I can maybe really fully answer your question that you started with, but the data and the technology for training are very good for things like awareness. Some people are simply unaware of how many calories they eat. When they're forced to track them with an app, they're much more aware of what's actually happening. Some people, for example, aren't aware how often they check their own cell phone. And there's apps you can have on your cell phone that let you know how many times you checked it. And people usually underestimate how often they check their phone by a digit or two. So it's very good for awareness. It's extremely good for calibration. So understanding, how fast really am I moving? Was this 90% or was this 60%? I don't really know. And so it can be used because it's objective. You can't influence technology, right, in terms of trying to cheat your way around it. So it's good for objectivity, it's good for calibration, it's good for awareness. Where it falls short, though, primarily, is context. Right? It doesn't understand why you're doing something. It doesn't understand other variables like motivation or sleep or tactics or technique. A good example here is there's a tennis racket that has a force sensors all over it, and it'll tell you, okay, after your entire match, what was the average velocity, what part of the rack you were striking it at, if you're going down. And a major misinterpretation there is just because your average swing velocity goes down throughout the match, that doesn't necessarily mean anything happened. It could be that the wind picked up and now you're playing into a headwind. It could be the fact that you were down some points and you were up some points and you were being more strategic and you weren't trying to hit it as hard and you were trying to place it more. Or 1,000 other things. The point is, the data is going to try to tell you what to do, but you have to still think about what's actually happening. You can't completely outsource your entire physiology, your entire coaching, your entire health, your entire wellness to these technologies because they're just data. They're not insight and they're not wisdom.
I think that's, I've noticed that in my life on more than one occasion. I'm quite into kind of personal trackers, and I'm quite keen to explore how these learnings that you've had with professional athletes, where you get measurable results, we can apply to people who might be listening who aren't professional athletes. For instance, using sleep trackers, which I'm a big fan of. When I changed sleep trackers fairly recently, it was consistently marking me down as about 45 minutes less sleep than what I thought I was getting every night. I was waking up in the morning feeling fine and absolutely furious because it was telling me I'd only had 5.5 hours sleep. So,
this is another secret, my man, that this is a part I don't like to talk about because it breaks people's heart, honestly, is you don't even want to know the accuracy of those things. They're really, really bad. If you look across the board at heart rate monitors, sleep monitors, step trackers, the highly consumable, the $30 billion industry part of tracking for the average person, their accuracy are tremendously bad.
Really?
Generally, I mean, some of them are great, some of them are terrible. They tend to be very reliable, but their accuracy is completely awful. And what you just experienced is so common, right? I got 2 trackers and I'm wearing them both at the same time and I'm getting completely different numbers.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't mean you can't use it. I'm not saying throw it away, but what I am saying is what I went back to earlier. Okay, if you know that it's probably consistent, but it's not necessarily accurate, well, take advantage of its consistency, but don't rely on its accuracy.
Yeah.
And that allows you to have a very good relationship with the technology to have some positive impact, but not to get sucked down the hole from all the negatives. If you're relying on the specific information, you can have a problem. I just got done using this with one of my pro athletes who competed, and we used a sleep tracker for his 12 weeks prior to competition, and it was laughable at the end because it was almost exactly what you said. Every single day that he felt amazing, were the days that said he had the worst sleep.
Right.
And the opposite. And we're like, so he's like, I'm not using this anymore. And I just told him, like, we'll keep tracking it. We'll look at the data later. We're not going to use it to make decisions about the training camp right now. But we'll compare it to next camp. And we'll track it over a bigger time set and see if anything pops up. But those things are extremely common. So if I would say to people, my advice is, if you're using some tracker like that and you feel like it's helping you make improvements, then by all means, please keep using it. But if it's not working or you're not getting the results you want, well, this is when we say, okay, maybe this is not the right metric I'm tracking. Maybe I'm set up poorly here. So now I've got to move on and try something else. So that's the last piece of the book called consciousness. And that's what we mean by consciousness, is just be aware of the fact that none of these things are perfect. And so if it's not working, let's move on and acknowledge that maybe there's a different solution.
There's the I don't know if you tried the Oura ring. It's a ring rather than. Do you think that about the Oura as well? You don't think it's particularly accurate?
Well, so we're still waiting for a lot more data to come out of the Oura. From the preliminary stuff that's out, it looks like that is a lot better.
Yeah.
Seems to be accurate for a bunch of logistic reasons, but it's still going to have fundamental limitations.
Yeah.
There will always be major limitations behind those things because it doesn't understand context, right? It doesn't understand what else is happening in your life. And that's not a knock against the Oura company. It's just the reality of these technologies, right? They're not intelligent. They are very good technology, but they're not necessarily good products because it comes down to the human interface, right? What are you using it for? How are you using it? What question are you trying to solve with it?
Yeah.
Because the biggest fallacy with these technologies, and these companies will try to tell you, like, more data is always better. And the research clearly shows that is not the case. In fact, it's very clear with human behavior, the more information, generally the worse you do. What happens is there's generally a linear increase between more data and more confidence, but there's no increase in accuracy or improvement with more data. In fact, it can be overwhelming and can throw a lot of people in the tank. If you look at weight loss, for example, the data are fairly clear that if you give people fitness trackers and they're trying to lose extreme amounts of weights, a huge percentage of those people will actually gain more weight with the trackers than without the trackers.
Really?
Yes, exactly right. In the medical situation and clinical situations, this is a very common finding.
Because they're not trusting their kind of, if you are constantly relying on data, or, I mean, you mentioned earlier a good word, which is input. And I think, now nobody's ever bored anymore, are they? Because the moment you go to the toilet or something, you pull out your phone and you've got something to distract you. But then it never quite allows us to tap into our intuition in the way that every generation before us has been able to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's just, if we had 5 more hours, we could go into the details of that, and that's a whole nother can of worms of just simply being distracted constantly. But with some of these things, what ends up happening is people's psychology are completely different, right? We have wide spectrums of people, so we have to acknowledge that when we give every single person across that psychological spectrum the exact same stimulus, they're all not going to respond the same way. Yeah. So some people will respond by being told that they're not doing a good job, by getting motivated. And that's fantastic. Let's use that tool to motivate them. That's great. Don't throw it away. Let's keep it. But some people on the other side, that actually puts them into a worse spot mentally, and they get more bummed out, and they get more depressed, and they get more anxiety about the situation because they constantly not going. Basically, the tech is telling them every day, you're failing, you're failing, you're failing, you're failing. And that has a real big issue with some people. And so we just have to acknowledge that that spectrum exists and understand if you're working with somebody and this is happening and you see this cycle, you got to pull them out of it, and you got to pull that tech away because they don't need the feedback. It's hurting them.
What
and if they can get more reliant upon themselves, that's always going to be a win. And they can start to feel what it feels like when they don't have energy. And they start to feel what it feels like when they're tired. And I don't need a sleep tracker to tell me, because if I'm paying attention to my own body, that, hey, you need to slow down today or tomorrow or sometime soon, because you're feeling all the signs of heading a huge breakdown here.
Mm. But I mean, you know, the theory of tracking is whether you're using technology for... So what you're saying is actually you could track it, but just without technology. So you know whether you've gone to bed at 11 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, track that stuff, but just don't use technology for it?
Well, you can use tech. You can... You know, it's really either way, because writing it down on a piece of paper or trapping it from an Oura ring, it's really the same thing.
Yeah.
It's not that different. But sometimes we want to track, and that can be good. Some people mentally work well with things like that. Some people work fantastic with rules. They like structure. And some people that can actually be deleterious.
Yeah.
And so we just want to acknowledge that, okay, when you're working with a client, that just because you have the personality that likes tracking and you have the personality that likes metrics and it gives you relief, that gives some people anxiety. And so you can't force your system onto somebody else when their physiology and their psychology works differently. They're in a different place than you are. And so we just have to be a little bit pliable and apply the proper solution for the problem, not try to apply the same solution to every single problem.
Right. And you're a professor of kinesiology, which I guess means that you're particularly focused on the way that things feel. Simple as that.
Well, sort of. I mean, my research laboratory, we actually study muscle down to a cellular level. So we take muscle biopsies from people and we run molecular and genetic experiments on the muscle quality itself. So I don't really do qualitative research. Like I don't do research on how you feel or your perception. Everything we do is extremely quantitative.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is like the other side of my brain right now talking to you, which is the human being part of it, not the scientist.
What, obviously you've worked with a lot of top sportsmen, and I know you've worked with athletes in the NFL and the MLB and the UFC, which is massively growing in popularity all the time. In terms of technology, we've talked a little bit about trackers there, but have you noticed anything more generalized in terms of technology when someone has a propensity to say spend a lot of time on Facebook each day? Because I imagine that a lot of professional athletes, they train 2 hours in the morning because they don't want to overtrain, and then they've got a lot of time on their hands where they might be just like spending a load of time looking at their phones.
Yeah. Most of my athletes actually train multiple times a day. The vast majority of them are training twice a day, and the 2 training sessions a day are not always full speed. But say they'll go in in the morning, they'll have 2 hours of really hard sparring. They'll take a couple hours off. They'll come back. They'll get a massage. They'll take a nap, or they'll get food. They'll sort of do some breathing drills that we want them to work on or something, and then they'll go back in the afternoon, and it might be a lighter session for technique, or they're working on skill or things like that. And so they're working out kind of all day, but it's not extremely vigorous all the time. Mm. But what that does do is it keeps their mind, again, focused. It keeps them into flow for several hours a day, because you can't really be distracted when their knees and elbows flying at your face. So it's a good way to get them to break that thing. So it's actually a little bit easier for them because they are constantly distracted. And then the top athletes I work with often have a lot of media responsibilities or other things. And so it's like, yeah, okay, I got to get off this. And so they're actually not stuck on their cell phones as often as I think most normal people are, who are just
cool. Okay.
working all day.
Yeah, because because email isn't such a big thing for them. It's more about performance. But if you do notice that one of them is particularly kind of tech focused, do you try and intervene, or is that something that you wouldn't say something about?
No, like I'm never going to intervene. My whole role as a coach consultant with them is to fix problems. And if I don't identify it as a problem, I'm not going to step in and try to act like I have a solution. If they're not getting their training goals, or they come to me and they say, Andy, I'm just not recovering. I'm having a harder time this time recovering. Then I'm going to step in and go, okay, well, let's look at all the things that you're doing. And if I feel like that is a problem, then I'll bring it up. But a lot of the times, man, the hard part is this is how a lot of them make their income too.
Yeah.
Is their social media presence. So I can't be like, get off your phone. And it's like, well,
yeah,
I'm getting paid to do this right now. And you're like, oh.
yeah. Okay.
All right. So yes, I would bring it up, but that's not going to be my first stop. Usually it's bigger things like, yeah, you're not recovering. Okay, well, let's look at your sleep. Well, you're not sleeping as much. Why? You're done at practice at 7 p.m., but you're not getting to sleep till midnight. What are you doing after you get home? Oh, you're cruising Facebook for 2 hours. Then I don't have to do, there's no conversation to be had. Because it's like they know the answer, and they're like, shoot. All right, like I got to get off Facebook or whatever. Even if it is their income, you got to put yourself in a position to succeed. And if you're not recovering, it's going to hurt your income even more because you're going to lose.
Well, yeah.
So,
and that's one of the interesting things about headspace and overstimulation. I just think that, if I'm lying on the sofa, there's a very different impact on my body and my mind between 2 hours looking at Facebook and 2 hours reading a book, even if it's on the phone.
Yes.
And I can't quite articulate why that is, but I absolutely know that's true.
Well, there's actually multiple reasons for it. So I'll keep using my professional fighters as an example. When you and I go onto Facebook or any social media platform, it's generally all love that we get. It's either I'm not paying attention to you or it's love.
Yeah.
But with professional athletes, it's almost all hate. And so now think about the mental space you get put in when you pop on your Instagram and there's likes and there's tags, but you're getting made fun of constantly, and people have made videos and pictures about you getting knocked out, and they're laughing at you. Like and now you're going to try to go to sleep?
Yeah.
Like now that's a real problem. So a lot of them, if they're intelligent, as they start climbing up the success rate, they just sort of check out from social media. They use it as a platform for business. They post things, but then they don't check comments, they don't check likes, they don't do things like that. So they have to step out of that space, which is a sort of a separate issue entirely. And so if you're comparing that to a book, well, yeah, of course. Now this is they're not even close to the same thing. We're talking light years apart. The other difference is when you're reading a book, what you're seeing, what you're feeling, the emotions and everything you're going through are coming from your own internal dialogue. You're generating those pictures, those imagery. That imagery is coming from your brain. When you're looking at social media, that's being put in your brain for you, which is all input. So instead of working through things and running on the treadmill in your own brain, if you will, you're standing there watching somebody else run on a treadmill. And these things are light years apart. You can't process. You can't get parasympathetic, which is critical for recovery. You don't downregulate. And we have a whole host of other problems. And so, I mean, if you just look at the imagination process and the critical thinking, I mean, how many times have we heard this joke that you come up with your best ideas when you're in the shower, or when you're on the toilet, or when you're out for a run? There's a reason, because you finally stopped letting input get into your brain, and you let your brain do what it's supposed to do, which is to critically think and go through all these processes. But if you don't ever stop bringing things in, you can't remember things, you don't use things, it's hard to digest, you're forgetful, and you don't stay focused on the task, you're constantly distracted. I call it continuous partial attention. You never really get focused on anything because you're continuously partially giving attention to everything because you're continually partially distracted. Yeah,
I've long known that I'm much better when I focus on one thing at a time. Everything. I'm happier, I'm more productive, I'm more effective. And I think most people are like that.
Yeah. It depends on the task, for sure. There's some things that I do where I can knock this out with my email up or something. But, I mean, can you imagine trying to do this show and checking your email?
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of a terrible conversation would this be? And more importantly, hey, you know what? Going forward, next time if I were to bump into you at a conference or something, I would walk right past you. I would not remember this. I've done hundreds of podcasts at this point. And if I was up here just kind of checking my email while you're talking, waiting for you to stop so I can say something, or if I'm popping on Twitter and all these things, I would walk right past you and you'd be like, hey, it's Tony, right? And I'd be like, cool. Yeah. Like, well, we did a podcast. Oh yeah. Or you might not even remember me because the conversation would be so terrible. But now we spent these 45 minutes or whatever in one-on-one human conversation. And so the likelihood of us actually having a real human interaction the next time we see each other is so much higher. And there's a physiological response to that you can't get matched when we don't have that real deep human connection.
Just interrupting the interview for one moment to tell you that this podcast is brought to you by the website ketoclubuk.com, bringing you the best ketosis supplements, including something that I have every single day, brain octane in my coffee. You've probably heard me banging on about this bulletproof supplement before. Bulletproof brain octane, it's a type of MCT oil. It's pretty much the finest MCT oil that money can buy, and you can get it at a very good price on ketoclubuk.com. And if you're not in the UK, I'm not sure that you can get it. But if you are, it's a great place to go. And there's all kinds of info about keto on there as well. Right, back to the show. You posted something interesting which you said was one of the reasons why you wanted to write your book, and I saw this on your Instagram a while back, and it was a correlation between television viewing time and inflammatory related mortality, which I thought was quite interesting. And you said on the post, this is a classic example of why we wrote the book Unplugged, and why you think we're kind of living in a major health crisis. I mean, it's not exactly saying this study that you watch more TV, therefore you're going to die earlier, but it's saying that there is a correlation between the two.
Yeah, I think this is, thank you. That's a very good point. This is not causation. TV is not necessarily bad for you. There's really fundamentally very little difference between whether we're watching TV or whether you're watching something on your phone. Like, those are not the same thing. But what this does say is the people who tend to watch 4 to 5 hours a day of TV are probably making other choices also about their health. Like, they're probably very sedentary. They're also probably not concerned with their physical well-being at all. They're not making deep social interactions. They're not connecting with people. And so it's not the TV that's a problem, but the TV is an easy metric that typifies the type of behaviors and the type of lifestyle people lead who die very young. And that, I think, is the power of it. It says, like, this is just one easy metric. So it's not the cause, but it is saying, like, well, look at your lifestyle. And why are you tired all the time? I mean, I get this constantly. People, I only sleep 5 hours a night. Like, how can you sleep 5 hours a night when you watch 4.5 hours of TV a day? Like, what's going on? Like, you couldn't get your email done. You're behind. You're stressed in work. Like, you watch Netflix for even an hour and a half every night. Like, this adds up. Now you're telling me you don't have time? You watch TV for 12 hours a week, which is actually way under the national average, right? But even that, it's like, that's 12 extra hours. I just gave you a whole extra working day. Or a whole extra day to go, you know what, I'm not working today, and I'm going to go out the lake today. Or we're going to go rowing today. We're going to go for a hike. We're going to do whatever. We're going to go watch a game. We're going to go out and enjoy food. Whatever it's going to be. We're going to sit with our friends, drink wine, and just tell lies for half an hour. Fine. That is all more productive generally than 12 hours of TV. And there's no reason why TV's, like, you can't watch TV. I still do. I love it. It's a massive down regulator for me. But I can't complain about these other physical problems I have if I were watching 25 hours of TV a week. I just don't have any. You know what the problem is you're not making healthy choices in all of your lifestyle, probably. And so you wonder why we've got all these problems. It typifies that.
And what about you personally? You are a professor and a scientist, and it's your job to kind of look into performance and marginal gains and everything else. What are the big things that meant that maybe if even more than marginal gains, kind of maxi gains that you've applied to your own life? So it might be meditation or fasting or ketosis or, I don't know, not switching your phone on until 12 o'clock. What are the things that have made a big difference to you that you've found on your travels of work for other people and work for you as well?
Yeah, but those are all really good. I'm going to probably answer this differently than than anybody maybe you've had.
Good, great, sounds good.
And I'll probably go against all those ideas because I personally don't work well with any of those things. I do not meditate. It's not for me. I don't have routines. I hate morning routines. I hate rules like that. None of that works well for me because I am generally, if I had to categorize myself, a creative. And I generally wake up extremely inspired, very happy, wanting to go do stuff, and I don't like waiting arbitrarily for 60 minutes or 90 minutes or going through this whole routine to go get something done that I'm really excited and I have clarity on what I want to do. And so those things would not make sense to me. They distract me, they take away from me because I'm just sitting there the whole time when I'm doing these other things going like, this is so stupid. Why am I arbitrarily waiting for 60 minutes or whatever other nonsense I'm doing when I have this idea, I came up with the problem to this, or the solution to this problem, go do it. And I actually like to get up, go get things done, or if I get up and none of those things are happening, then I'll go do something else. So I might exercise first thing. I might do an ice bath first thing. I might do something different, but I don't like to give myself arbitrary rules that doesn't allow for the spectrum of my life, right? So I like to not have structure like that. But the way that worked for me is because of one thing. And this is the one thing I have learned over time is you just have to be conscious and you have to be aware of what's going on. And that's what allows me to succeed like that because I'm simply aware that if I put myself into positions of routine like that, I don't like it. I don't get more productive, I get less productive. I'm not saying what I do is good or bad. I'm just simply saying I am aware that that's what happens to me. So the more you can become aware of how well you work, then you can apply these things. And some people are very aware that they're more productive and they're happier when they meditate. And that's fantastic. I could not encourage that enough. Some people are also more aware that it is problematic for them if they check their phones all day. I tend to walk around all day or operate all day making choice after choice. And if I'm working and I go to grab my phone, I just try to have the awareness to go, Andy, you're not needing to check your phone right now, get back to work. And then I am able to get back to work. So I'm just trying to be mindful and conscious at all times of what I'm doing and what my purpose is. What's the real point here? And that works for me. And I totally acknowledge that cannot work for everyone. But that is how I like to operate. And that type of extreme ownership for me serves me very well. My wife doesn't operate that way, so she doesn't try to operate that way. She is very much more effective when she has specific rules and specific things that you do this from 3 to 4 p.m., from 5 to 7 p.m. This is when you do that type of stuff, and I can't operate like that. So the one thing I have learned working with athletes too is kind of like what I mentioned earlier. They're the same way. And so don't try to put them onto the rules that work for you as a person. You have to get what worked for them as a person, and you got to operate your rules as a coach and put them in a position to succeed, not in a position that just you found succeeded for you, because you're a different person.
Good stuff. Yeah, definitely being conscious is a good one.
Yeah.
So,
and I'll add more to this. Like, I will do all those things you mentioned sometimes. I love doing some fasting. I love doing a bunch of different things. I will intentionally put myself in a position, like there's a difference between optimizing and adapting. And if you're constantly optimizing your day, so if you wake up in the morning and you know that you work best when you meditate, and then you don't eat, and then you have your nootropic, and you have your coffee, and you have this whole routine, and it takes you 2.5 hours to get into it, but you know that's how you're going to operate best for the next 5 hours. Great. Sometimes, a lot of times you should do that, and you should know what those things are so that you have that option to get into it. But that's optimizing, and if you're optimizing at all times, you're not doing what's on the other side of the spectrum, which is adapting. You're not practicing resiliency, which is critically important. So what ends up happening is if you're optimizing at all times, and I've seen this with a lot of my athletes, we'll spend 10 or 12, 16 weeks getting ready, and then one tiny little thing goes wrong the day of the fight, and they're thrown off mentally because they've optimized so much, they've lost all resiliency. And so you have to be a little bit careful. Sometimes you need to wake up and go, you know what? I do have an important day today, and I have to get some things done. and I'm not going to meditate today, and I'm still going to execute. I'm not going to use it as an excuse. I'm not going to turn in poorly done work. I'm not going to have my nootropic today. I'm not going to have 4 gallons of coffee today. I'm a human. Like, I'm going to get this thing done because I need to get this thing done. And the easy way, I think, to understand this is imagine somebody broke into your house in the middle of the night, and you shot downstairs and you addressed the problem. You would be completely focused. You would be in flow, I promise you. You wouldn't have needed to meditate. You didn't need your nootropic. You didn't need coffee. So what's the difference between that and finishing that report or checking in at work? The difference is how much you cared. You really cared about addressing that situation when that person broke in your house, and you didn't really care as much about finishing that business thing you had to get finished. And so what that tells me is those things are helpful for everyday grind, but you can succeed without them. So sometimes you do need to practice the other end of the spectrum, which is the resiliency, which is, things are not going to go right all the time, and you still need to be able to execute. So that way, when you go back and optimize, it feels really good, and it truly is optimized, and you're not all of a sudden, that hour routine didn't leak into, well, now I need 2 doses of nootropics, and now I needed another liter of coffee. Well, now I need a second liter of French press coffee. Oh, now I got to have 45 minutes of it. And all of a sudden, you don't have any more resiliency. You have no grit. You have no mental toughness. Yeah. And you're, as my friend Kelly Starrett says, you're too precious. Like, you're too precious. You've got to be able to perform.
Point. Yeah.
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 So
because also
there's
a control thing as well there, isn't there? You know, when you're too focused on controlling, you're not very good at surrendering. And I think especially people who tend towards the control, optimizing every inch of every minute of every day, actually could do well to let go and just accept and see what happens throughout the day.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And challenge yourself and challenge yourself, but don't give yourself the excuse that today is a challenge day. So you know what, I'm not going to get much done today. Yeah. Like that you cannot do that. The same thing when you try fasting. And this is one of the things I like about fasting is, if you're the type of person who, I'm sorry, I'm cranky at lunch today because I haven't eaten in 3 hours. Like, really? You're that mentally soft? Yes, your blood sugar is maybe down, but tough it out. Like, get over it. You still need to execute. You can't be that weak, right? I understand you're physically a little bit uncomfortable. Well, you know what? To hell with it. Don't eat for 3 days and still perform. And you know what? You will. And that's why I think that type of mental strength, it's like, man, I'm no longer going to complain and be cranky and be irritable and be a terrible coworker after I had to skip lunch today, because last week I went 3 days without food and I still did everything right. And I still had a great day and I still performed. And so when you have those extreme metrics behind you, you sit back and the rest of the stuff starts to go, you know what? Maybe that wasn't so difficult. Maybe I didn't have to do all those things because 2 weeks ago I sat in a 35-degree ice bath for 5 minutes and I thought that was hard. This is no longer hard.
So, Dr. Andrew, just before we finish, something I've asked everyone is, what is one book you'd recommend and one tip of everything you've learned, one tip for living with energy, vitality, and motivation?
Sure. So with the book, what I'll say is my friend Chris Moore has a book called Barbell Buddha, The Collective Writings of Chris Moore.
Oh, okay.
And it's sort of 3 smaller books put into one. And Chris was just an amazing soul. He was deep into philosophy, he was deep into exercise, he was deep into music, and he was deep in entertainment and people and love. And it's just a really eclectic collection of a bunch of really short stories that sometimes they're about philosophy and sometimes they're about psychology, and they're just sort of different areas. And I think like it's a very easy book to pick up and you can read for 5 minutes in the morning and you have some unique insight and you'll see things differently in the world. And it's still mostly geared towards physical and health and stuff, but it's just a really, really nice book. So that's the book that I always recommend to people. It's something that you don't have another book like that, and there's probably not a single blog or Twitter feed or something that has, I think, that array of different things that people like. So I like that because it keeps me variety, and it's like you don't know what the next passages or the next story is going to be about, so fall into it. So I like that. And then the second part of your question was about vitality or
energy. This podcast is kind of, principally about energy. So what is kind of one tip that you'd give people for more of it?
Yeah, okay. So the biggest one I would say is you have to challenge your assumptions. And what I mean by that is challenge your assumptions about what your body can and can't do. If you do this optimization versus adaptation thing, you realize most of us are slightly underfed for nutrition, we're slightly overcaloried, we're slightly underslept, we're slightly constantly distracted, and we're constantly slightly underhydrated. And we're living in this middle area at all times, and that ends up just being a wall of stress. It kills energy, it kills vitality, it hammers it. So instead of doing that, I would recommend that you swing a little bit more from extreme to extreme. And this is really what we talk about in the book, of course, is, yeah, you know what? You'll be shocked, but go 24 hours without food, and you'll be shocked at how even your energy gets. You won't have crashes and swings. But match that with a period of eating very well. And match that period of real short sleep deprivation with extreme replenishment of sleep. Right? So challenge yourself. Go, you know what? I'm going to sleep 10 hours a night for 5 straight days. And then I'll go back to my normal routine. But just 5 days, I'm going to push things back 2 more hours or whatever it's going to be. And then go through, boom, periods of eating really well. Right? Balance that out. Go through periods of extreme cold, extreme hot, whatever you're going to do. And if you have those bookends and you can open that stuff up, you're going to start to really understand what your body is telling you. And what we've almost seen universally is people just like, wow, I'm just not tired anymore. I'm not hungry anymore. I don't have these problems anymore. When I am hungry or when I am get cold, it's not that big a deal anymore. Because I matched that.
Yeah.
Whoa, that was a really hard 3 weeks. Okay, now I need to recover. And so I'm going to be very hydrated, and I'm going to really just add another hour or 2 every night to my sleep.
Brilliant.
And it doesn't have to be like changing your lifestyle so you're sleeping 10 hours a day the rest of your life. No, but just maybe 5 days. I'm going to really try to recover really hard and sleep for 12 hours, and then I won't get out of bed for the first hour. I'll just do my breathing drills, and I'll stretch, and I'll just do something like that. And so you're going to walk out of bed, and you're going to feel amazing. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Andy. Really appreciate it. It's been really good to talk to you. And where can people find out more about you and the book as well?
Yep, so Unplugged, it's up on all of the usual suspects. So Amazon, the book is titled Unplugged, Evolve from Technology to Upgrade Your Fitness, Performance, and Consciousness. So Amazon, all that stuff. You can check out my website, andygalpin.com. And, you know, as you mentioned, I'm in the kinesiology department, so I teach exercise, health, nutrition, all that stuff. And what I do is I actually give away all my university lectures on that website for free.
Oh, awesome. That's really cool.
So there's a few up there, and I'll keep adding more up there. And it's generally geared for people that don't have a background or just have a very little background. And I present a lot of the ideas kind of like what I just said to you. So it's how to exercise and stuff, but it's really it's thinking bigger and thinking better about these things. And then, of course, my social media is just at Dr. Andy Galpin, so Dr. Andy Galpin. That's the general place to find me, and you can find links to my podcast and all my other stuff up there.
Brilliant. Dr. Andy, thank you. Really appreciate it. Great to talk to you.
Likewise, man. I'm great to connect, and thank you for the time as well.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks to Dr. Andy. I'm still going to be using my Oura ring. And in fact, the new one comes out soon. It's a lot smaller and makes you look slightly less like a mafia boss. And I might wear that out and about as well. So I've never worn a ring. I'm not really a ring kind of guy, I don't think. But I will probably be a new Oura ring kind of guy, despite what Andy says at some points about the downsides of tech as well as the benefits. Thanks for listening to Zestology. As always, if you want to get in touch, you can head to the website, tonywrighton.com, and I will speak to you next week. Oh, just before I go, remember the website, ketoclubuk.com. This podcast is brought to you by ketoclubuk.com. It's a new club in the UK for people who are into ketosis or a high-fat, low-sugar diet. That's me. Although I do like carbing up every once in a while as well. And if you are someone who likes, for instance, to put some MCT oil, some C8 MCT oil in your coffee or over your salad during the day or something like that, boost your ketones a little bit, then you can get it pretty much cheaper than anywhere else, most of the time, I think, at ketoclubuk.com. I think the site does deliver to other countries, but it may not be quite as cheap as in the UK. So if you're not in the UK, sorry, but check it out anyway, ketoclubuk.com. There's loads of keto info on there and stuff like that as well. Right, that's it. Cheers. See you next week.